Please subscribe, it helps a lot.
The drive back from the estate felt like moving through the throat of something vast and silent. The trees pressed in from both sides, dense and skeletal, their naked branches reaching toward the car like grasping fingers. Victor fell in and out of sleep, his head tilted toward the window, mouth slightly open before fixing himself straight up again. The venue was everything we wanted. Secluded, timeless, untouched by the world creeping forward beyond its iron gate. But even in daylight, something about the place unsettled me. The trees loomed taller there. The quiet wasn't peaceful, it was absolute, like the estate existed in a world separate from ours. We were already from a small town in Ruland, Vermont, but this place was even more secluded than where we were from. I shook the thought away and kept my eyes on the road, lit only by the tunnel of my high beams. Nothing but pavement and trees, no streetlights, no houses. The GPS hadn't registered a single turn since we left the estate. The silence pressed in, my fingers tense against the steering wheel. I reached for the radio dial but hesitated. The silence had weight to it, the kind that warned you not to break it. Victor stirred beside me, murmured something, then settled back into sleep. I exhaled through my nose, flexing my fingers to loosen them, and forced myself to focus on the road. Then I saw it. A shape crouched low at the tree line, just before the road curved into darkness. A trick of the light at first, shadow against shadow. But then the headlights caught it. Sleek black fur. Muscles coiled tight beneath its skin, eyes reflecting the light in twin burning discs. I barely had time to process what I was seeing before it stepped forward. Not a cautious step, not skittish, deliberate. The panther walked into the road without a step of fear. A cold pulse spread through my chest. I lifted my foot from the gas pedal, but the car was already moving too fast. The panther did not move. I jerked the wheel. The tires screamed. The world snapped sideways as the car pitched off the road, slamming through underbrush. A violent jolt, then an explosion of sound as we hit something solid. Glass shattered. My body wrenched forward, the seatbelt cutting deep into my ribs. My head snapped back after I flew face first into the airbag. Pain spiked through my skull, sharp, electric, then everything vanished into black. I woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor. The room was dim, the air thick with antiseptic and something stale. A single light flickered above me, its glow weak, barely cutting through the gloom. My skull throbbed in time with my pulse, and when I tried to move, pain rippled through my ribs. Memory came back in pieces. The empty road, the black shape shifting from the trees, eyes burning in the headlights, the jolt of impact, shattered glass. Victor sat beside me, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked fine. Bruised, a few shallow cuts along his temple, but fine. His relief melted into something else the moment I met his gaze. Where are we? My voice scraped against my throat, dry and raw. The hospital in Rochester. We hit a tree, Victor said. He leaned forward, resting a hand on my arm. His touch was warm, steady. You scared the hell out of me. I pushed past the ache in my ribs and forced myself upright. The room blurred for a second before settling back into focus. The panther, I said. Victor didn't speak right away. His hand lifted from my arm. What panther? He said. The words settled in my chest like a stone. I searched his face for hesitation, something to tell me he wasn't sure. But his expression was calm, patient, the way you looked at someone who was wrong but fragile enough you didn't want to push too hard. I saw it, I said. It was right there. It walked into the road. Victor exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We were driving through the middle of nowhere. It was dark. Maybe it was a shadow or a... No. My hands clenched the stiff hospital blanket. I know what I saw. The door creaked open before Victor could answer. A man in a white coat stepped inside, his smile warm, his presence reassuring in a way which made my pulse slow. He carried himself with practiced ease, the kind of bedside manner designed to calm. "Cody, good to see you awake," he said. "I'm Dr. Ellis." I nodded, but my muscles stayed locked tight. He pulled a small penlight from his pocket and gestured. "May I?" I didn't move, but he stepped forward anyway, lifting the light to my eyes. The beam sent another pulse of pain through my skull. He hummed softly like he was satisfied. "You're lucky. No concussion, no fractures." He lowered the penlight, slipping it back into his pocket. The scans came back clear. I swallowed. Then why does my head feel like it's been cracked open? Mild trauma, whiplash most likely. You took a hard hit. Victor shifted beside me. "So, he's okay?" Dr. Ellis gave a reassuring nod. "Physically? Completely fine." Physically. He didn't say mentally. Before I could dwell on it, another knock at the door pulled my attention. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. One was older, thick arms crossed over his chest. The other was younger, wiry, his fingers drumming against the notepad in his hand. Neither of them smiled. The older one spoke first. "Cody, I'm Officer Langley. This is Officer Ruiz. We wanted to ask a few questions about the accident." Victor sat up straighter. "Is this standard?" "Given the circumstances," Langley said, "we like to be thorough." My fingers curled around the edge of the blanket again. The circumstances. "We checked the scene," Ruiz said, flipping open his notepad. "There were no animal tracks near the road, no fur, no sign of anything crossing at all." My pulse ticked up. "I saw it." Langley's gaze didn't waver. "The road was dry, your car didn't skid. No evidence you hit the brakes before the crash." The words settled in slowly. I ran through the moment again in my mind. The panther's eyes, the deliberate step into the road, the snap reaction, the jerk of the wheel. I knew I braked. "Is it possible?" Ruiz said. "You fell asleep at the wheel?" The suggestion hit like a slap. Number Y was awake. Langley studied me, expression unreadable. "How much have you had to drink today?" "No, nothing." Ruiz tapped his pen against his notepad. "Stress can do strange things. You've been planning a wedding, right?" Victor made a noise beside me, something soft and uneasy. He didn't say anything, didn't argue. The officers watched me. The doctor watched me. Victor watched me. Like they were waiting for me to agree. Like the reasonable thing to do would be to doubt myself. The first crack in my reality splitting right beneath me. The growl pulled me from uneasy sleep. Low, deep, the kind which rumbled in the bones before the ears caught up. My body went rigid. The hospital room sat in near total darkness, only a sliver of cold fluorescent light from the hallway slipping in through the cracked door. The monitors beside me hummed softly, their beeps steady. Normal, but the air felt too still, as if the room itself was listening. The sound came again. This time, I knew exactly where it came from. The window. My heart punched in my chest as I turned my head, slow and careful, toward the glass. The blinds were down, but the slats weren't completely closed. A fraction of an inch between them let in the barest hint of night. I could see shapes outside, twisted shadows of trees, the empty stretch of the hospital parking lot. And something else. Eyes. 2 pinpricks of reflected light staring through the slats. A shape crouched in the dark, impossible to make out except for those eyes glowing like embers. I pressed myself back against the mattress, breath locked in my throat. The thing outside didn't move. It watched me. My fingers dug into the blanket, pulse hammering against the ache in my skull. If I blinked, would it disappear? If I sat up, would it lunge through the thin panes? I fought the urge to move, but my body betrayed me. One sharp inhale, a jerk of my foot against the sheets. The eyes flickered. Then they were gone. The next morning, I told Victor, His lips pressed into a tight line, his hand resting on his knee, fingers tapping in a rhythmic way he did when trying to keep his frustration in check. "Cody," he started, careful, hesitant. "Are you sure?" I pushed the hospital food tray away, appetite non-existent. "I saw it. I heard it." He ran a hand through his hair. "You had a serious crash. You were unconscious for hours. Maybe it was—" I exhaled sharply. "Do not say hallucination." Victor hesitated, then glanced toward the door like he was hoping for an interruption. As if on cue, Dr. Ellis stepped inside. His expression softened the moment he looked at me, calm and composed, the same careful smile from yesterday. "Good morning, Cody. How are you feeling?" I swallowed, the words sticking to my throat. "I heard something outside my window last night." His head tilted slightly, polite interest. "Oh? A growl?" I hesitated. "I saw eyes." Dr. Ellis hummed, like he was processing. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of stillness that made the hairs on my arms rise. "It's common to experience hallucinations after trauma," he said, voice soft. "Especially following head injuries. The mind can process stress in strange ways." My stomach twisted. It wasn't in my head. He gave a slow nod, as if acknowledging my conviction. But it wasn't agreement. It was understanding. Understanding that I believed it, even if he didn't. The police came again before lunch. Ruiz and Langley, same tired expressions, same unreadable stares. Ruiz flipped open his notepad. "We reviewed the scene again in daylight. No sign of anything unusual. You're sure you didn't fall asleep at the wheel?" I ground my teeth. "No." Langley crossed his arms. "You weren't drinking?" "No." Victor shifted beside me. "Come on, guys. You already asked him all this." Ruiz tapped his pen against the paper. "Stress can do strange things." The words made my fingers clench against the blanket. How many times would I have to hear that? How many ways would they tell me my own mind could not be trusted? Langley exhaled through his nose. "We'll let you get some rest. You'll be released tomorrow at noon, but leave your contact information. We may have more questions." The moment they left, Victor stood, muttering something about getting coffee. I didn't stop him. I sat there, staring at the pale yellow walls, listening to the faint sounds of the hospital beyond my door. Footsteps, distant voices, and something else. The nurses at the front desk laughed. Too soft to make out the words, but something about it sent a cold pulse through my ribs. It wasn't the sound itself. It was the rhythm. Too perfect. Like they weren't reacting to anything. They were performing. I turned my head toward the door, catching sight of a nurse passing by. Her stride was smooth, too smooth, as if she never had to adjust her balance, never misstepped. I hadn't noticed before, but now it was all I could see. Something was wrong here. The voices outside my door were hushed, but not enough. Starting to notice. A chill tightened in my chest. The spoon I'd been pushing through the untouched mush of hospital oatmeal stilled in my grip. He won't last much longer. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood too fast. The room lurched. My body wasn't ready for sudden movement, but I forced myself toward the door, pressing my ear to the crack. Silence. I yanked it open. Two nurses stood at the desk across the hall. One, a middle-aged woman with hair pinned in a tight bun, glanced up, meeting my gaze with a practiced, professional smile. The other, younger, kept her eyes down. "What did you say?" My voice came out raw. The older nurse's smile didn't falter. "Excuse me?" I took a step forward, bare feet against cold tile. "I heard you. You said he's starting to notice." Her expression remained smooth. Too smooth. "I think you misheard." I stared at her, throat dry. Number I didn't. The younger nurse's fingers twitched at her side. The tiniest motion, but I caught it. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, the older one turned to her, tilting her head slightly. The movement was small, but it meant something. A warning. The younger nurse clamped her mouth shut. I stepped closer, my pulse too fast, my body screaming danger in a way I couldn't rationalize. The woman in front of me, her face, her posture, the measured way she breathed, it was all wrong. Neither of them said anything. The moment stretched too long. I backed up, then turned away, heading back into my room, my hands clammy despite the cool air. Before the door shut, the young nurse's voice slipped through. A whisper. "You should leave before it's too late." I spun, but she wasn't even facing me. "What did you say?" I said. But she turned around, bewildered, as if she hadn't said anything at all. That night, I didn't sleep. The air inside the hospital room thickened, pressing down on my lungs. I lay in the dark, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. The fluorescent light in the hallway hummed softly through the cracked door. A sound drifted in. Not the deep, guttural growl from before. Footsteps. Software. Controlled. Moving outside my window. My body tensed. The covers felt suffocating. I forced myself up, moving toward the window with slow, deliberate steps. The blinds were closed, but the faintest sliver of space between them let in a sliver of night. I reached for the cord, heart hammering, pulled, and froze. Outside, against the hospital's dim security lights, shapes moved. Not one, not two, 5. Panthers, low to the ground, sleek bodies shifting like liquid shadow. They wove between the trees at the hospital's edge, too many eyes reflecting gold, fixed on me, watching, waiting. My breath hitched, but my throat locked. The air refused to move. I stumbled backward, chest caving around silent panic. The hospital walls felt thinner than paper. I had nowhere to go. The closest panther tilted its head. It knew. I turned, fumbling for my phone. The nightstand was empty. I tore the drawer open. Empty. I searched the bed, the floor, ripping at the thin sheets. Gone. Heart pounding, I lunged for the landline on the wall. My fingers slammed the numbers 911 before I even processed the motion. Silence. I pressed the button again. Nothing. The call would not go through. A sound choked out of my throat, part frustration, part terror. The walls pressed closer. The edges of the room felt wrong. The window, the door, the voices lingered too long in the hall. Something was keeping me here. Victor. I only noticed now he was fast asleep on the bench on the opposite side of my bed. It took a lot to get him up. He stood rubbing sleep from his eyes. His hoodie hung loose on his frame, his posture slumped in exhaustion. Cody? They were outside. My words rushed together, my body still wired with adrenaline. The Panthers, more of them. My phone is gone, the landline doesn't work, the nurses. Victor ran a hand through his hair. Cody. They were outside. There was nothing in the road. His voice was soft but strained. I blinked. What? He exhaled slowly. You keep saying you saw something, but I was in the car too. I didn't see anything. The words struck like a hammer to the ribs. I stepped back. You don't believe me. But you weren't even awake. His jaw tightened. Cody, I don't know what you want me to say. He rubbed his hands over his face, suddenly looking so tired. Maybe you need to rest. My skin got cold. I stared at him, my own fiancé, the person who knew me better than anyone, the person who was supposed to be on my side. And he looked at me like I was sick, like I was something broken, like everyone else. A hollow weight settled in my chest. Maybe they were right. Maybe... I forced my nails into my palm, grounding myself in the sharp press of pain. I knew what I saw, and something in this hospital wanted me to forget. The doctor's voice softened, his presence steady in a way which made the rest of the world feel weightless. Cody, he said, drawing a chair closer to my bed. I know how real it all feels. I know how exhausting this has been. I swallowed. My throat felt raw, like I had been screaming for hours. He gave me a look of pure understanding, as if he had all the time in the world for me. It's terrifying, isn't it, when your mind turns against you? I shuddered at the thought. The brain is powerful, he continued. When it experiences trauma, it can create things, images, sounds, sensations which seem real but aren't. It's not your fault. It's stress, exhaustion, and fear. Perfectly normal under these conditions. His voice was a lullaby, smooth and careful. I exhaled slowly. Maybe it was the dark, the headlights. I could have imagined. There you go. He smiled, not condescending, but warm. Think about how late it was. Your nerves were shot. The wedding has been a lot on you, hasn't it? I hesitated. Victor said the same thing. The police, the nurses, even my own mother who called earlier and murmured about how much I had on my plate, how the mind plays tricks. My head throbbed. Doubt gnawed at the edges of my thoughts. Had I been spiraling this whole time? I just want you to feel safe again, the doctor said, squeezing my shoulder in a reassuring grip. And you are safe. The words settled over me, heavy and warm, like being tucked into a blanket. Safe. I was safe. Victor hovered in the doorway, his face still drawn tight with concern, but I saw the relief in his eyes when I finally exhaled. I think I need sleep, I admitted, my own voice distant. Victor reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, solid, real. The doctor gave a satisfied nod and stood. Good. That's good. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. Victor squeezed my hand before stepping back. I'll be back first thing in the morning, okay? The others drifted away. Nurses, staff, the occasional police officer still lingering near the station down the hall. The door eased shut with a soft click. Silence. I inhaled. The hospital air was cold, sterile, but it felt different now, less suffocating. For the first time since the crash, I thought maybe everything would be okay. Then, click. The sound was quiet, but final. I turned. The doctor stood by the door, his hand resting on the lock. Not in a casual way. Deliberate. My breath thinned. His face, always so gentle, so warm, smoothed into something empty. The softness in his gaze drained, leaving behind something sharper, hungrier. My body tensed, the atmosphere shifting like a sudden drop in temperature. Doctor? My voice barely broke the silence. He exhaled, almost like a sigh. Then he smiled. Not the same as before. This one stretched too wide, teeth too sharp behind it. It's much better when they struggle. The air in my lungs vanished. My body refused to move. The doctor changed. Not in a metaphorical way. Not in the way someone's face might shift when they reveal their true nature. Number. His bones cracked. His body folded into itself, muscle and skin stretching, reshaping. A low, wet sound filled the room, like something breaking apart and knitting itself back together all at once. I stumbled backward. My feet refused to work properly. Blink. Look again. The doctor was gone. Standing in his place, its massive frame blocking the door, was a panther. Not just any panther. The panther. The one from the road. The one that was waiting for me. Its shoulders rolled, muscles flexing beneath sleek black fur. Its tail twitched once, slow and thoughtful. Then it locked its gaze onto me. A low sound rumbled from its chest, something deep and ancient and knowing. I pressed back against the bed, pulse hammering against my ribs. There was no misunderstanding this. No hallucination. No trick of light. And now, there was no one left to believe me. The panther took a step forward. Its massive paws barely made a sound against the tiled floor, but the weight of its presence crushed the air in the room. My body screamed for movement. Every instinct I had, run, fight, anything, but my limbs refused. It wasn't fear that held me still. It was understanding. The moment I swerved off the road, my fate was decided. This place, this town, this hospital was nothing more than a holding cell, a waiting room before something inevitable. A low, deliberate breath came from the panther, slow and measured, like it had all the time in the world. I forced my muscles to work. My hand shot for the bedside table, searching blindly for something to put between me and it. The panther watched, unblinking, not lunging, not attacking, waiting for me to accept it. I wrenched open the drawer, my fingers curling around a pair of bandage scissors. Useless. But I gripped them like a lifeline. The panther took another step. Its body shimmered, something shifting beneath the surface. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Not in words, not in a voice, but in a way I felt. A pressure against my skull, filling the spaces between my thoughts. Stop struggling. There's no need. The scissors shook in my grip. Get away from me. A sound rumbled from its chest, something close to a chuckle. You've seen the truth. No one believed you, not even him. Victor. My stomach twisted. Victor, shaking his head. Victor, rubbing his temples, sighing, exhausted. Cody, there was nothing in the road. Maybe you need to rest. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the memory away. You're lying. Am I? The room flickered. A hospital room, then something else. A dark stretch of forest. The old estate, looming in the distance. The panther moved closer. You were never going to leave here. The air pressed in from all sides. But you don't have to be afraid. The weight of its gaze burrowed deep, something cold sliding into my bones. I opened my mouth, to scream, to fight, to deny, but the sound never came. Darkness swallowed everything.
Victor answered his phone half asleep, rubbing his eyes as the hospital's number flashed across the screen. Hello? His voice was thick, groggy. Mr. Holloway? The nurse on the other end sounded pleasant. Too pleasant. Victor sat up, suddenly alert. Is Cody okay? Oh, he checked out early this morning. Victor blinked. What? He left on his own, around 5 a.m. A pause. Victor's stomach sank. That doesn't make sense. He wouldn't have... The nurse hummed sympathetically. Patients are free to leave when they choose. He seemed much calmer, clear-headed. Victor swung his legs over the edge of the bed, already reaching for his keys. Did he say where he was going? I'm afraid not. A silence stretched between them. Victor's pulse pounded in his ears. Something felt wrong. If you have any concerns, you're welcome to come back, the nurse added. He didn't like the way she said it, like she already knew he would. Victor muttered something polite before hanging up. The search lasted 3 days. Police found no signs of struggle, no suspicious activity. It was as if Cody stepped into thin air. On the 4th day, the police suggested Cody needed time, that maybe, after everything, he chose to disappear. Victor didn't believe it. Couldn't. But the days turned into weeks. The search slowed. Calls went unreturned. The town, the hospital, the police, they all moved on too quickly, like they expected it, like they seen it before. A month passed. Victor found himself back on the road, driving through town one last time. The hospital loomed in his rearview mirror. The estate, nothing but a distant memory. He told himself to let go. Then, as the trees thickened, something caught his eye. A shadow in the distance. A figure, sleek and low to the ground. Watching. Waiting. Yellow eyes glowed from between the trees. Unblinking. Unmoving. Following him. Victor's breath stilled. His foot hovered over the brake. Then the shadow turned and disappeared into the woods.
Please make sure you are subscribed and be one of the strange.